Hello everyone, my name is Jose Alcaraz. Today I'll be presenting how to use Microsoft Excel pivot tables. Let's get started. Before talking about pivot tables, I want to first introduce you to Microsoft Excel in case you're not sure what that is. It's a popular data analytics computer software where users can create spreadsheets to organize and analyze data. So within that, there are pivot tables. And pivot tables allow you to create a data table that summarizes and extrapolates like the useful data and more relevant information of like a bigger data set. That way you can show the viewer in a concise way exactly what you're trying to tell them. For this lesson, we'll be using an example spreadsheet provided from this website. If you want to get the worksheet, just control and right click on the link above and get the spreadsheet. So the objectives for this lesson will be for you to be able to learn how to highlight a table range and create a pivot table, understand the 4 fields of a pivot table, and choose the appropriate fields to add to the pivot table, while also being able to create multiple summarized looks of a larger data in the form of a pivot table. Pivot tables can be used in many different situations, but they're most useful when dealing with large data sets using data sets with too much irrelevant information. So if you want to just take part of that and show it to the viewer, wanting to summarize a data set neatly for the viewer to see and just kind of get your point across in a quicker way. Getting a pivot table started is actually pretty simple. You just have to highlight the data set. If you want to do this quicker, since there are about 4,000 cells of data within this data set, you can just click on the first cell and then press Control A and it'll highlight the whole thing. From there you go over to the Insert tab, which is showed up here, and then click on Pivot Table. So when the dialog box shows up, make sure to check existing worksheet, because we'll want to do this within the same worksheet instead of creating a whole new one, and click on the little arrow shown on the right here by location, and then click cell I1, and then finally click OK. So now you'll see on the right, it'll show this table, and here it'll show you all the headings that were within that data set before. And by adding these fields down and these quadrants down here, you'll be able to create pivot tables. So the rows section will indicate the headings that will be going down the vertical axis, and the columns will show the headings that'll go across the horizontal axis, while the value field will show like which calculations will be shown within the data table. So calculations can include sum, count, the average, the variance, standard deviation, other things. The filter field won't be used too often, but it lets you add certain filters to make the pivot table even more concise. So for this example, we'll want to see how many of each party there are per age group. So how many Republicans, Democrats, Independents, part of the Green Party there are per age group. So in order to do this, we want to drag the party heading down to columns, and then drag the age group down to rows, and then again do the party column and drag it to values. So this over here on the right will be the resulting pivot table, and then down here I've used some conditional formatting, which I will go over later, in order to show the most, the highest count per each age group. So some other examples of pivot tables Really, you can do this by trying a variety of different combinations, so just play around with that. It's just important to remember exactly what each quadrant does, and that way you'll be able to create a bunch of different examples that might be useful for the viewer. So for example here I put the age group in the rows and then the years and the values, and I changed that field to be not just the count of the years but the average. And what this ends up showing me is that the average 18 to 20-year-old has only been registered to vote for 2 years, which makes sense. But the important and more interesting part here is that people that are 71 and up have only been registered to vote for an average of 20 years, which is kind of counterintuitive. You would think they'd been registered since they were like 18, but showing here that that's not exactly always the case. So, and give you some interesting facts depending on what you put in which section. So to summarize, you should now be able to create a pivot table from a data set, identify the function of each sections within the bottom quadrant of the pivot table. You should be able to extrapolate meaningful information from the pivot tables that you do create and meaningfully summarize a large data set with the viewer in mind. For additional resources, you can always go to support.microsoft.com and click on Office and click on Excel, and under the Help tab you should be able to find pivot tables. Thank you.